I've never really used the word submission in my work for obvious reasons. It's a very loaded term. So the first thing I want to do is just explain what it really means to be quote unquote submissive in a relationship with a man. All it means is to be willing to yield or to bend to someone else's ideas or suggestions and not have everything your way all the time. At least that's all I mean by it. The problem is with the submission concept is that it's layered with a lot of depth and nuance. I mean, too many people think of it as being, you're supposed to kowtow to somebody's will all the time and do whatever they say and have no opinion about it. So let me tell you what submission, now that I've defined it, at least by the way I mean it when I talk to women about this, although again, I don't really ever use the word submission. Here's what submission is not. It is not being a doormat. It is not never sharing your opinion. It is definitely not saying nothing when you're being treated poorly. So at the end of the day, only you in your relationship can determine whether or not the person to whom you're married or in a relationship with is someone worthy of quote unquote submitting to, if you want to use that word. Here is when to submit and when not to. When there's mutual respect between two parties. B, if you're married to a fundamentally good man. And you know whether you're married to a good man. Most people know that. It's very obvious in the way that we're raised, in the way they talk to you, in the way they treat other people, in the way they treat women in particular. Clearly, everything that this woman's explaining in this email, that is not a good man. That you're basically dealing with a boy in a man's body. Any man who would talk in the way that she's saying he talks to her or calls you names, that's a really obvious one. You never accept any verbal abuse from anybody. You're not dealing with a good man if you're dealing with somebody who verbally abuses you. So that's a big tip-off. The moment if he's ever calling you names or being, as we say, verbally abusive, then you're not dealing with a quote-unquote good man. And that's not someone to whom you should be submitting. You have to be careful, though, with the verbal abuse thing because, unfortunately, a lot of women confuse verbal abuse with emotional abuse because, again, that's a very slippery slope. It's very easy to make accusations of narcissism and gaslighting. Those are really famous words that we use today. We throw around a lot. Let's put it that way. It's not that you can't be dealing with that. It's that you have to be very careful about to whom you're ascribing those terms. It can be true or it cannot be true. It's very easy, especially today with the culture that we live in, where anytime somebody says something you don't agree with, you're told that you're being abused, which is just crap. That isn't true. So you have to really get help from a professional if you think you're dealing with narcissistic type behaviors. I have seen this in my coaching practice, and if I think I'm dealing with something outside of my scope of expertise, I move them on to somebody else, of who can help in that domain. But I have to say that in all the coaching I've done, I can only think of 2 scenarios, maybe 3, where it was reversed like that, where the women really were putting into action what I was suggesting, and it was not, working, if you want to say that, with their particular husbands because they were dealing with somebody who should not be submitted to because he's got a lot of problems of his own that he hasn't worked out. And you can tell that by, I think this person said that this gentleman was red-pilled. You really want to stay away from the red-pilled men, not because they're bad people, but because if you're a marriage-minded woman who wants a relationship that is going to become marriage, the red-pilled men are not your folks because they're off of marriage. They've decided to turn away from that. And so there's not going to be a meeting of the minds there. So at the end of the day, when I talk about submission, and again, I don't use that word because it's so loaded that I think it's confusing for people. I always frame things with respect to just how do you want to behave with another human in a way that gets that person to respond to you. I'm much more interested in the Dale Carnegie, how to win friends and influence people type strategy in working with people. And my point in talking with women about it is because they're told that if you're ever, listen to a man, for example, that you're somehow weak or letting him win and you're supposed to stand your ground. Those are the things I'm fighting against. I'm trying to explain the difference between these cultural messages that you've been taught to believe and what really works in a relationship with a man. So it sounds like submission sometimes, a lot of what I talk about, and that's why I'm addressing this, because in no way, shape, or form, if you're dealing with a man who is not good, should you, or is in any way abusive, should you ever be putting into action the things that I teach. And I actually, in the Alpha Females Guidebook, have a caveat at the beginning of that book saying that very thing.